What's up, guys? Bill here. In this video, I'm going to talk about pegs, power earnings, gaps. I've done a video on this before, but I wanted to expand on a little bit and dive into some things that I look for to kind of help rank the peg setup. So every earnings season, I have a watch list that I dedicate just to these power earnings gap setups. And what I like to do is kind of rank them in the ones that I feel like are going to have the best chance of continuing strength, right? And there's some things to look for that might even tip you off for potential for that next day, the day after they gap up, that they could just keep going for another day or two. Because a lot of them, it's supernatural. A lot of them, the next day they kind of consolidate or even pull back, which we expect, right? After a big move like that, it's totally natural that people are going to take their profits. The move needs to be digested and things like that. And then eventually what you start to see is bull flags forming and retraces to the EMAs and things like this. They'll give you that better entry. But there are ways and things to look out for that might tip you off to ones that are just going to rip for a few more days. So let's talk about that, right? There's three main things I look for. You can see we have DraftKings pulled up. This was one of my favorite peg setups after the day it happened, and I'm going to talk about why. Okay, the first thing I look for is the total move that it makes during that peg day. All right, I want to see greater than 10%. Now, I play only more popular names, liquid, high volume stocks. I don't trade pennies. I don't trade biotechs and things like this that will do 80%, right, in a day. So in more liquid names like DraftKings, I'm looking for 10% or bigger move on the gap up. Okay. Second, I'm looking at the volume of said move, and I want it to be notable. And here's my guide for is it notable or not. It needs to be at least the highest volume it's had since its last earnings report. Okay. So we can see down here on DraftKings, this is the highest volume it's had. It's higher than its previous report. And it looks like highest volume it had since February of this year. Okay. So that's notable to me. And, bonus points if it's like highest volume of the year, highest volume ever, right? We actually D-Dog, Datadog had its highest volume day ever on its peg. So those things will happen. Just kind of keep an eye out for that stuff and look for that volume. Okay. Last thing is, where does the peg candle close? I want it to close as close to highs as possible. Now, obviously, just because there's a little bit of a wick on top or something doesn't negate this, but looking for those next day continuation plays, I want something that looks like DraftKings, where there's barely any wick there. The bigger the wick, the less likely I feel that it's going to play for continuation the next day. That doesn't mean it's not a good setup, for a week from now with some consolidation and another leg up. But for that next day play, I want it to look like this. Okay. And you can see all three of those things were checked off the list. And what did we get? The next day, another 4%. The day after that, another 2.5%. Just nice continuation and then kind of flagging. And you don't always see this with the pegs. A lot of times you get this candle and then you get a little pullback and some chop and then a bull flag breakout, right? So this is just a way to kind of look for that stuff. Let's look at some other ones, some other examples, and I'll show you some examples of what you don't want to see as well. So here's Roku. We got to check off all the things, right? How much did it jump up? 30%. Huge, right? What was the volume? Okay. Not amazing, but at least the highest since its last earnings report, right? Not amazing. That's had some other big volume days, but it checks off that box, right? And then where do we close? Really close to the high. Perfect. And what do we get the next day? Another 8.5% move. And then we start to flag out. Let's look at some that don't meet all the criteria and what they did the next day. Here's Disney. Disney failed the criteria because it only gapped up 7%. Okay. So I would have avoided at least trying to play this long the next day, wait for some type of pullback instead. It had okay volume, highest since its last earnings. It closed fairly near the top of the candle. That's good, but the overall move, not big enough. Next day, down over 2%. Okay. Lastly, we'll look at Roblox. Roblox had pretty great volume. The highest it's had all year, okay? So great volume. How big was the move? 12%. Perfect. But look how he closed. Big wick up. Closing at the lows. Not what you want to see, guys, right? You know, so it doesn't check all three boxes. And what happens the next day? Down 3%. Okay? So this is how I'm looking for that next day continuation. I'm using these criteria. And also I kind of rank my pegs like this. So if it's checking all three boxes, I'll put them towards the top of my watch list. If it's maybe missing one or two things, doesn't mean it can't. You know, Roblox could consolidate like this and have another leg up in the coming week or two. We don't know that. I won't just delete it from my peg list, but I'm not going to prioritize it. I'm definitely not going to try to long it the next day. Okay? Hopefully this video helps, guys. If you have any questions about anything I discussed in here, just leave a comment or reach out on Twitter and I'll help you out.